Hello everyone, have a nice day. Today we'll follow Jack and Tu Tien as she finally returns home safely, and they try to rebuild peace after terrifying days apart. But just when their hearts begin to calm, a new clue from Comrade Thu pulls them back into fear, and a silent warning makes Jack realize the danger may still be close. If you find it interesting, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. The first thing Jack noticed wasn't the phone vibrating in his palm. It was Tu Tien's breath warm against his neck, like proof that the nightmare had finally spit her back into his arms. She stood in the doorway of the farmhouse, hair damp from the night air, eyes swollen from days she didn't want to remember. Jack didn't ask for details. He just pulled her closer, his grip too tight for politeness, too desperate to hide. "I'm here," she whispered, voice thin but real. "When I feel your warmth, I know I've truly returned." Jack's throat locked. For days, he'd imagined 100 versions of her return, and none of them had prepared him for how fragile she looked up close. His hand slid to her shoulders as if he could steady her by holding her in place. "Nothing bad will happen again," he said, then caught himself because he didn't control fate. So he changed it into a plea. "Please don't leave me again. Stay with me, always." Tu Tien stared at him like she was searching for the one thing she could trust. Then she nodded. "Yes," she said, "I agree." Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His forehead lowered to hers. For a second, the world was only the two of them and the sound of a distant dog barking outside. "You don't know what it was like," he murmured. "Every time I came back here without you, this place felt empty, like the air itself didn't belong." Tu Tien's fingers tightened around the fabric of his shirt. "I felt the same," she admitted. "Even when I was walking, I kept thinking I should be hearing your voice." Jack's jaw flexed. He didn't say the part where he'd blamed himself, where he'd replayed every fight and every silent moment, wondering if work had turned him into someone unlovable. But it slipped out anyway, rough around the edges. "Every time I looked for you," he said, "I thought, maybe you left because of me, because I wasn't good enough, because I chose projects over you." Tu Tien's eyes shimmered. She lifted a hand and touched his cheek, slow, careful, like she was afraid he'd vanish if she moved too fast. "I didn't leave you," she said. "I fought to come back to you." Jack swallowed hard. "Then we'll protect this," he whispered. "Us." He tried to smile, tried to bring the moment back to something gentle. "Come inside. I brewed tea." The farmhouse smelled like home and waiting. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated far too carefully with lights, ornaments, and a ribbon wrapped around it like a promise. Tu Tien stared at it, stunned. "Jack, you decorated it beautifully." Jack rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly embarrassed. "I bought everything that day," he admitted. "I wanted to surprise you. I prepared it all, but then I couldn't find you." His voice cracked on the last words. He cleared his throat and gestured toward the table. "Sit, drink some tea." On the table were boiled potatoes, still steaming, and a small teapot. Jack poured with hands that looked steady, but Tu Tien noticed the way his thumb trembled against the cup. "What tea is this?" she asked softly, as if the wrong tone might break him. "Black lemongrass," Jack said. "A friend got it for me. It's good for your liver." Tu Tien held the cup with both hands, letting warmth seep into her fingers. "You woke up early?" she asked. Jack nodded. "I didn't sleep much, but I wanted you to eat. I wanted to do something normal." She took a bite of potato. It was sweet and dense, and for the first time in days, her stomach didn't twist in fear. Jack watched her chew like it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Everything tastes better when you're here," he said, voice low. Tu Tien's lips curved faintly. "In the forest," she admitted. "I dug up a root once like a yam. I roasted it because I was starving." Jack's smile vanished for a second, replaced by something fierce. "Don't say that like it's nothing." "I'm home," she reminded him gently. Jack nodded, forcing his breath to slow. "When you feel better," he said, "we'll go thank the old woman who helped you, together." Tu Tien looked down. "Okay." He shifted the conversation because that was what Jack did when pain got too sharp. He talked about small things. The workers had fixed parts of the farm. He'd checked the bricks in the vegetable garden. He even talked about the dogs, how the workers begged to keep the puppies, how one white pup was left alone. "We can raise it together," Jack said, trying to make it sound simple. Tu Tien nodded, but her voice turned cautious. "Jack, I heard something the other day. Mrs. Tui's mother. She said she would send someone to make things difficult for you." Jack's eyes darkened. Tu Tien rushed on, afraid she'd made it worse. "I don't want to scare you. Please be careful." Jack stood and came behind her chair, resting his hands on her shoulders. "From now on," he said, "wherever you go, I will go with you." She leaned into his touch. "What about your work?" she asked. "The company?" "I'll manage," Jack said. "I'll stop by later. Nothing is more important than you." Tu Tien hesitated, then glanced at his hair. "Your hair, it's gotten long." Jack laughed once, but it sounded tired. "I've been waiting and searching for you. My hair grew while my mind was losing itself. If I couldn't find you, I thought I'd let it grow as long as yours." Tu Tien's eyes softened. "We can cut it," she offered. Jack nodded. "Later, together." Then Tu Tien's expression shifted like she'd stepped onto a fragile edge. "Jack," she said quietly, "there's something I was going to hide from you." Jack froze. In the silence, his phone left on the counter lit up. A name flashed on the screen. Comrade Thu. Jack's gaze snapped to it, the air tightening like a pulled wire. And before either of them could breathe, the call began to ring. The ringtone cut through the kitchen like a blade. Jack stared at the screen as if the name itself could summon trouble into the room. Tu Tien's fingers hovered near his wrist. She didn't grab him, didn't stop him, only anchored him with that silent, trembling closeness. Jack answered on the second ring. "Comrade Thu." Thu's voice came through low and urgent, the kind of calm that meant the storm was already here. "Jack, I have a new clue." Jack's shoulders tightened. "Tell me." "We recovered something from a contact near Writer's Cafe," Thu said. "A short recording. It's not clear, but there's a voice young, male, and one line repeats." Tu Tien's face drained as if her body recognized danger before her mind did. Jack glanced at her, then turned slightly away, shielding her from the words as if that could shield her from the memory. "What line?" Jack asked, Thu exhaled. Take the shortcut back to the farm. Don't let her call. The kitchen seemed to tilt. Tu Tien's hand finally gripped Jack's sleeve. Her nails pressed through the fabric. That's exactly what happened, she whispered, more to herself than to either of them. I tried to reach for my phone. I couldn't. Jack closed his eyes for one brief second, just long enough to lock the panic behind his ribs, then open them again. Can you trace where it came from? He asked. We're working on it, Thu replied. The sender used an anonymous number, but the audio is a crack in the wall, Jack. A crack we can widen. I need you and Ms. Tu Tien to come in and give one more statement while it's fresh. Jack's jaw flexed. We'll come. And Jack, Thu added, voice tightening. Don't move alone. Whoever did this is watching reactions. They like fear. Jack's gaze flicked to the dark window, to the quiet yard beyond it. Understood. He ended the call, but the silence that followed was worse than the ringtone. Tu Tien swallowed. He said, a young man? Jack nodded slowly. He didn't tell her about the tattoo Vin had seen. Not yet. He didn't want her mind to turn every face into a threat. But his eyes had already changed. No longer soft. No longer only love. There was steel in them now. He reached for her hands and held them between his palms. Listen to me, he said, careful, steady. You're safe, right here, with me. Tu Tien tried to breathe. What if it happens again? It won't, Jack said. And this time, it wasn't a wish. It was a decision. He crossed the kitchen, pulled a small box from a drawer, and set it on the table. Inside was a simple wristband, sturdy, plain, nothing romantic about it. Tu Tien stared. Jack, it's a tracker, he said quickly, before she could misunderstand. Not to control you, to protect you. So if anything happens, I will find you in seconds, not days. Her eyes filled again, not with anger, but with the ache of being loved fiercely. She extended her wrist. Jack fastened it gently, but his fingers trembled at the clasp. The tiny click sounded far too loud in the quiet room. At the exact moment it closed, Jack's phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. Jack's thumb hovered before he opened it, as if he already knew it would hurt. On the screen, a single sentence stared back. Stop testing me. You know me. The warmth in the room vanished. Tu Tien leaned forward, reading Jack's face before she read the words. What is it? Jack locked the screen, but it was too late. Fear had already touched her eyes. He forced his voice to stay calm, to keep her from falling apart. Nothing you need to answer, he said. Just stay close to me. Outside, the motion sensor light flared on. Both of them froze. For a heartbeat, the yard was bright as day, and at the gate, a shadow stood just long enough to be real. Then it slid away into darkness like it had never been there at all. Tu Tien's breath caught. Jack stepped in front of her without thinking, his body a shield. His phone rang again. This time, it was Comrade Thu, urgent. Jack, Thu said, voice sharp. Mrs. Tui collapsed near the station. She was holding a piece of paper with Ms. Tu Tien's name on it. Tu Tien went still, as if the words had pinned her to the floor. Jack's eyes turned cold. We're coming, he said, and hung up. He grabbed his keys with one hand and Tu Tien's wrist with the other, the new band flashing under the kitchen light like a promise and a warning at once. Jack, she whispered, He didn't let his voice shake. "Stay with me," he said, "no matter what we see
To
next."
the farmhouse, and Jack holds her tightly. Overwhelmed with relief and fear of losing her again, they share a tender moment of tea, warm food, and a small promises of staying together while Jack quietly tries to restore her senses of normal life. Tu Tien confesses she planned to heal a chapel health issue but before they can talk, come ready to cause Jack with a new clue. A recording linked to Ryder's Cafe reveals a young male voice ordering someone to take the shortcut back to the farm and stop Tu Tien from calling. The words trigger Tu Tien trauma and sharpen Jack's protective instincts. Jack gives her a tracking bracelet for safety, but an unknown number says, "Stop testing me." You know me. A shadow appears at the gate, and two reports Mitri collapse, holding Tu Tien's name.